So Matt Walsh did a response to John Oliver's recent segment on homeschooling, and, well, to be as blunt as possible, I had more than a couple of issues, so let's commentate on it.
I have in the past on this show given John Oliver a bit of a hard time, and it's easy to give him a hard time seeing as he is such a smarmy, insufferable little British muppet. But my biggest issue with John Oliver isn't that he is an annoying, smug bastard, it's that he's an annoying, smug bastard who thinks that his own IQ is about 40 points higher than it really is. He makes very lame and very trite arguments that, to the suggestible viewer, pass for clever and intelligent because he has a live audience of trained seals applauding the whole time.
I'm pretty sure if you Googled poisoning the well, this clip would appear. Seriously, Matt spends the first couple of minutes of this video just insulting John Oliver before actually getting to his segment and responding to his points. Of course, even if John Oliver were the walking embodiment of the Dunning-Kruger effect, it wouldn't actually debunk anything he says in this segment specifically, so this whole thing is incredibly pointless.
He also spends a lot of time making his lame and trite arguments. He harps on one subject for almost half an hour, which tricks his gullible fans into thinking that he's being thorough. They see that he has a 25-minute monologue on a certain subject, and they figure that it must be like the definitive smackdown on that topic because it's 25 minutes long. What they don't realize is that he's actually just restating the same shallow, dubious premise over and over again for 25 minutes.
Yeah, spoilers, Matt doesn't substantiate this claim at any point in this video.
I'm going to go through the monologue in extensive detail so that you can hear it for yourself. Unlike John Oliver, I don't believe in cherry picking.
Just remember this part because Matt's going to engage in cherry picking later on in this video.
So we're going to go through this. Now, Oliver's basic position is that there isn't enough regulation on homeschooling parents. He insists that a large number of us are abusive and negligent and stupid, and we need greater oversight to make sure that we are teaching our children in a way that the state finds acceptable. Actually, John Oliver wants to make sure that we're teaching our children in a way that John Oliver finds acceptable. But it just so happens that John Oliver's views and priorities are indistinguishable from the state's. He is paid millions of dollars a year to say things on camera, yet he never says anything that any generic bureaucrat wouldn't say. He just uses a little bit more profanity when he says it.
Yeah, John didn't say that. He did call for greater regulation, but he never called most homeschooling parents stupid or abusive. All he did was say that our current lax system made it so those who are stupid or abusive don't receive consequences for their actions. He also never said the state should demand you be educated in a way he approve of. I mean, don't get me wrong, I'm sure he'd prefer if children were educated in a way he would approve of. Because everybody would. Who exactly sits there and says, I would prefer it be done in a way I don't approve of? But that wasn't the point of his segment. His issue was with homeschooling parents who don't educate their children, not who don't educate their children in a way John Oliver agrees with.
We're going to talk about homeschooling. During the pandemic, many parents were suddenly forced to do it, and while some struggled, others, like this family, absolutely thrived.
A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J, K, L, M, N, O, P, Q, R, S, T, U, V, W, X, Y, and Z. Now you know your ABCs.
That is clearly excellent, but it is also a pretty mean way to make other parents look like total sh**.
Matt begins this interjection by repeating his already made point about how John Oliver thinks all homeschoolers are child abusers and Nazis, while saying he's using this family specifically as a good example, so he has license to call the rest of them those. Given I already responded to the premise of what Matt is saying, I'm just speeding through this part.
Also, if you're the cynical type, you may have already noted that Oliver's example of good homeschooling comes from a black family. And you might say to yourself, well, of course, yeah, that's what he would do. And yes, you're right. That is totally intentional. Throughout the monologue, he gives 3 examples of sympathetic homeschool families, and they're all black. All the examples of bad homeschoolers, on the other hand, are white. That is how utterly predictable and contrived all of this is. With that, let's continue.
Okay, even ignoring how fundamentally weird that is to point out, and I'm not calling you racist or anything, Matt. I want to be clear, I don't think this is evidence of that. I just think that's a really strange thing to note. That's also not true. John shows an example of a homeschool parent who he does believe is doing a good job educating his children. That is white later in this segment, and you even show it in this video before cutting the context, so it makes it look like John is only speaking negatively about him, but we'll get to that in a bit. Just know this is wrong, and it will be proven wrong later.
And you may have heard a stereotype of homeschoolers being Christian conservatives who object to what kids learn in public school environments. And I admit, those people do exist. Take this man who offers this pretty shaky rationalisation for pulling his kid out of school.
I think the type of content on what they're teaching about sex or anal sex, that my third-grade daughter should not be in a classroom where a teacher or someone else is teaching her about that.
And that was your experience in school?
I through friends in other spots that had been kids at those ages, because mine was only in first grade when we pulled them.
Well, that sounds like total Although I guess I do basically agree with him there. Things that are definitely not happening should continue not to happen.
Now, here we have, of course, a patented John Oliver tactic, which is scoffing in place of an actual argument. This is all Oliver will do to even acknowledge the concerns over sexually inappropriate subject matter in public school, despite the fact that these concerns are a major primary driving force behind the growth of homeschooling.
Source, please. Not even saying you're wrong, just want to see a citation.
So you would think that he would spend a little bit more time on it. But Oliver simply declares that all of those concerns are, quote, total and moves on.
He actually just declared this one person's concern was total bullshit, not every homeschool parent's concerns. You're extrapolating something from Oliver's statement that just isn't there.
You notice what he doesn't do? He doesn't go into any specific detail, or any detail at all, about the actual content of public school comprehensive sex ed curricula.
What are you expecting him to do exactly? Go through every public school curriculum one by one in order to disprove that guy's claim? John only has half an hour in order to do these monologues. He doesn't have time to go into meticulous detail about every single claim that is brought up. That would be ridiculous.
The ceiling of how good homeschooling can be is admittedly very high, but the floor of how bad it can get is basically non-existent. Because to an extent that you may not realise, in many parts of the country, homeschooling is essentially unregulated, which can result in enormous damage. So given that, tonight, let's take a look at homeschooling. And let's start with the fact that there is a lot that we don't know about homeschooled kids, from exactly how many there are to what they are learning. When I said there are around 2 million of them, the reason that's an estimate is that, depending on the state, homeschool families might not have to report what they are doing at all. In these 26 states, parents simply have to file a notice once a year with officials to let them know that they are homeschooling their child. In these 13, they only have to file a notice once with no requirement to check in ever again. And in the remaining 11, they don't have to notify anyone at all.
Oh, dear God. Can you imagine the horror? You mean to tell me there are potentially millions of parents out there who are, talking to their kids and teaching them and guiding them and telling them things without providing the state and John Oliver with a full written account of everything they're saying?
That's not something John Oliver called for. He didn't even call for anything in that clip. All he did was point out how lax the already existing regulations are. Actually, fuck it. I'm just gonna play this clip.
If you subscribe to an idea, you also subscribe to that idea's ideology, and to every possible negative consequence that that ideology remotely implies when you carry it to absurd extremes.
Here is one parent enthusiastically explaining how he taught his kids science.
I can't tell you how many times, in my home, in our kitchen table, we've dissected, sheep eyeballs or frogs. Kitchens are great labs for this kind of thing.
Where does somebody get a sheep eyeball?
Well, John, you can just Google sheep eyeball for homeschoolers.
I didn't know
lots
that.
of people. Absolutely.
OK, first, are kitchens the best lab for this kind of thing? I think probably labs are the best lab for this kind of thing. I'm just saying, maybe don't go dissecting sheep eyeballs in the same place where you cut olives for salad.
Matt begins by mocking John Oliver for not slicing meat or something. I'll grant him the way John phrased his joke was kinda weird, but I also think Matt drags out his response a little longer than necessary, especially given this isn't even the main point Matt was going to make about the segment he played.
But the real point is that Oliver is inviting us to laugh at a homeschool dad who's obviously going to great lengths to provide a very thorough scientific education to his children. Like, this should be an example of one of the good homeschoolers, but this is Oliver's example of a bad homeschool education.
Yeah, this guy is actually a very good example of a homeschooling parent. And do you know who would agree with that? John Oliver! Although he does rib this guy a little bit because it's a comedy show, so obviously he's going to try and make as many jokes as possible. Oliver segues into this clip by discussing how homeschooling advocates say that parents come up with innovative ways to teach their children.
And homeschooling advocates will tell you that that is not a concern, and the parents will simply come up with all sorts of innovative ways to teach their kids.
Before saying that he went to impressive lengths for the sake of his child's education.
And while that man was clearly willing to go to impressive lengths for at-home science lessons, not everyone has the time or the resources to develop a curriculum from scratch.
Meaning, again, this appears to be somebody who Oliver is praising, not criticizing.
It is absolutely a parent's right to educate their child with religion if they so choose. But the quality of some of these books can be troubling. For instance, one current Abeka history book says that the beginning of the 20th century witnessed a cultural breakdown that threatened to destroy the very roots of Western civilization. The cause of this dissolution was an idea or philosophy known as liberalism. Meanwhile, a workbook from ACE celebrates the Confederate General Robert E. Lee as a devoted Christian who practiced his Christianity in all his dealings with others.
Yes? What's your point? Both of those statements are true. At the very least, they are intellectually defensible perspectives.
Intellectually defensible? Are we giving children textbooks or copies of the American Historical Review? A lot of positions are intellectually defensible. However, there's a general agreement the only ones that belong in textbooks are ones that are objective fact. Oliver's point is that these works are obviously biased in favor of one specific perspective, and could even be sacrificing educational merit due to that. And it's funny you cut it off right there, given this is the next example Oliver shows.
And a science book from Bob Jones University claims that biblical and scientific evidence tend to support the idea that men and dinosaurs existed at the same time. And if you're wondering what that would look like, ACE actually had a workbook featuring this rendering, implying that not only did men and dinosaurs exist at the same time, but they were totally cool with each other. Hey, Hank, great tucked-in shirt. Did you see that dinosaur over there? Sure do, Bob. Love those jeans, by the way. Should we run? No way. These dinos are chill. Let's just keep whacking these leaves with that one sword knife that you brought.
Do you think that position is intellectually defensible, Matt? I know you don't think it's true. Given you've done 2 episodes of your podcast specifically on why you think young Earth creationism is incorrect.
But Oliver, again, simply scoffs at them and in the process inadvertently proves why homeschooling is so important in the first place. He believes it is an objective and self-evident fact that liberalism has been an unquestioned force for good in the world, and that Confederates were all cartoon villains fighting for nothing more than the continued subjugation of black people.
Or he just doesn't think that one's opinion on liberalism or the faith of Robert E. Lee are particularly important details that need to be put in a textbook for children. Why is that not also a possibility, Matt?
He's not even smart or introspective enough to realize that his views on those topics are subjective.
John's view on liberalism is subjective, but his views on why the Confederacy fought aren't. Those are objective, either true or false.
So when his subjective views are taught as fact in public school, and they are, he sees no legitimate reason for anyone to object.
I continue to point out that Matt has not provided a single piece of evidence for this claim. He is accusing John Oliver of hypocrisy without actually giving an example of him being a hypocrite.
Even that is a preferable alternative to the single worst homeschool curriculum that we found, whose creators excitedly promoted it on a podcast.
We are so deeply invested into making sure that that child becomes a wonderful Nazi. And by homeschooling, we're going to get that done.
Well, that is terrifying.
Now, you should know that Oliver actually lingers on these Nazi homeschoolers for multiple minutes.
Yeah, I timed it. It's actually closer to 1.5 minutes, maybe 2 minutes if you want to stretch it out.
He dedicates a sizable chunk of his monologue to this podcast nobody's ever heard of or listened to, and this one random whack job who represents at most maybe, I don't know, 0.000000001% of homeschoolers, if that many.
Yeah, and Oliver specifically took note of it being the worst case he could find. He is specifically noting this is an incredibly fringe exception and far from the rule. However, he's making a wider point about how lack of regulation causes people like this to be able to do what they do.
He can't begin to engage with the actual arguments for homeschooling, the reasons that the vast majority of homeschool parents would actually give.
Which you're expecting him to do in a part of this monologue about what homeschooling parents are teaching their children for some reason.
So instead, he draws our attention to the most outlandish, obscure outlier he can possibly find. Now, Oliver may be a pedestrian midwit, but he certainly at least realizes that the number of homeschool parents who want to turn their kids into, quote, wonderful Nazis is not large enough to fill a school bus, much less warrant a mention during this segment.
What kind of standard even is that? John is showing a variety of examples of bad homeschooling curriculum in order to make a point that the lack of regulation leads to bad actors having free range. Exactly how many people need to be involved with one specific homeschooling project before John is allowed to use it as an example? I don't get your point here, Matt.
Deregulating homeschooling doesn't just eliminate safeguards against parents who are bad teachers, it also eliminates them against parents who are bad people. For all the HSLDA's talk of parental rights, it's worth remembering Elon Musk is a parent. O.J. Simpson is a parent. Darth Vader is such a parent, he made it part of his fancy name change. The point is, having a child does not inherently make you virtuous. And one of the key problems here is child welfare laws were written before homeschooling was legal in all 50 states. So they rely heavily on the premise that a child is going to be in school and seen by other adults.
Yeah, Elon Musk is a parent. I mean, you wouldn't want Elon Musk teaching... You wouldn't want a guy who's building rocket ships going into space teaching your kids, right? Obviously, a third-grade science teacher is better equipped than Elon Musk to teach science. Obviously.
I mean, somebody can be an incredibly intelligent man with a long string of accomplishments and still not be qualified to be a teacher. That's why you have to undergo very specific training in order to become a teacher in the first place.
So there it is. Homeschool is a cover for child abusers, he contends. Many homeschool parents are using homeschool to hide the abuse they're inflicting on their children.
Are you incapable of framing what John said honestly? No, nowhere in that entire monologue did he make the claim that all homeschool parents were using homeschooling as a cover for abuse. He just said the lax regulation around it causes that situation to occasionally occur. Anyway, that's all I want to cover. So, final thoughts. Matt Walsh is dishonest. I don't know what else to say. Good night and good luck.